The main show tonight's Matt Zingraff. Take a couple seconds to introduce Matt. We ran into each other on the Kispioks last fall. This very kind man was out skulking around our cars when I spotted him out of my trailer, and I thought, oh, I think he's after our gear. Well, it turns out, no, he wasn't. He was just trying to find somebody to talk to because he was camping by himself. So we ended up fishing one evening together, and I wrote this story down because I thought it was hilarious. Matt's upstream from me. It's one of the few days that week that the water was really fishable for steelhead. And Matt's above me and I'm below him. And he comes down, finally fishes his way down to me. He goes, he asked me this question. He goes, do you hit yourself on the head very often with that fly? And I said, no, but I don't want to start now. And he goes, yeah, I noticed every time you cast, you duck. And so I go, I'm really struggling with this rod, and I'm struggling with this fly that Jim Ferguson tied for me. The fly was humongous, and every time I cast it, it came back to me like a parakeet in a thunderstorm, whistling by my ear. So every time Matt looked down, I was doing this. And this sweet man took time out of a perfectly good fishing evening to spend some time with me with my rod, trying to figure out what was wrong with it. And I remember sitting on the bank thinking, that's dedication. This man is a gentleman. I really respect him. He has an amazing craftsman, and I love his story. And I collect reels, and someday I hope to have one of his because they're some of the most beautiful reels I've ever seen made. And without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Matt Zingraff.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the introduction. It's weird. I can't see anybody in there, but hopefully people are able to see me or at least hear me. And to just kind of reiterate that day up north with Steve, this was the day. Steve actually took this picture of me casting in the upper part of the run, and it's just up on the Skeena is such a great place. It's always a treat to see who you run into. Really, it's all about sitting around the campfire. You do catch fish occasionally, but it's really the people and the fun that you have while you're doing it. So I'm glad I got to meet you, Steve. So today, I appreciate the invite to come down here or to talk to all of you. This is my first time giving a presentation on the reel making, so please bear with me. I'm going to just kind of walk you through my story and talk about the stuff that I make and how we use it and things like that. So a little bit about me, so I'm a Midwesterner. I grew up in Wisconsin, and it's surprising how many people from Wisconsin have moved out west, whether it's Bob Miser or other, kind of well-known people in the fishing industry that have just migrated out west, and then all of a sudden they start finding fishing later in life, or at least for myself, revitalize their love for fishing later in life. When I first moved out west in the early 2000s, it was really to be doing this kind of stuff, being in the mountains, running and venturing and things like that, because I was young and just really being in a different place than where I grew up in the upper Midwest. As I got older, I started to kind of go back and revisit fishing. As you get older, you start to realize you're mortal and your body starts to break down, and you can't do these kind of high impact sports like you do when you're young. I myself had a hip replacement just a few years ago. I'm in my 40s. It's pretty atypical for a 40-year-old to have a full hip replacement. And so because of that, I wasn't able to do these types of sports, rock climbing, skiing, or running obscenely long distances like 50 plus miles. And so because of that, I started revisiting my love for fishing. Growing up in the Midwest, I fished a lot, primarily for bluegill and smallmouth bass. But moving out west, I started to kind of learn how to double hand cast and going for steelhead and shad and all these other agronomous fish that I didn't really experience growing up in the Midwest. Come to find out, there's really good steelhead fishing back there, but that's not how I was raised. I was raised to primarily catch bluegill and crappie and bass. So I kind of made this transition, right? Going from high impact sports to starting to fish. During this time, I was starting a family and getting my daughter out into the water. And pictured in this slide are two boats that I made. So, I grew up woodworking. I love woodworking, and I love making things that I eventually use. And so I've made a few boats. I made the wooden dory, and I made the cedar strip canoe. And that was a really fun project. It took my woodworking skills to the next level. But, when you start a family, there's conversations with the family of like, can I make another boat? If I do make another boat, where can I put that boat? Or, am I going to be able to use another boat? And so I kind of had this, I've had this struggle for a while with, I would start a hobby and then I would, I made a boat or I made two boats, and then you realize like I can't make any more because I don't have a place to put them, or I don't have someone to buy them. And so I started kind of transitioning to my next hobby, which is kind of my life for a long time of, starting woodworking. You make cutting boards, you make furniture, you make spoons, and eventually you just kind of, you have enough of them and you move on to the next thing. And so during this time, I started, I'm thinking about searching for a new hobby. When I moved out west, I started fishing again. It was primarily in like my 30s and 40s, I started fishing again. And I started building fishing rods because, I love fishing, and why not support my hobby by building fishing rods? And I started exploring this, building bamboo fly rods, or taking Bob Miser's very affordable spay blanks and building spay rods that I could use. And eventually I had a closet full of rods. And I started wondering if I'm going to be transitioning to a new hobby because I can't really have more rods, or I struggle to find people to buy rods, partly because the rod building industry is, it's quite full. There's a lot of bamboo rod builders up and down the West Coast. And personally, I didn't really envision myself being able to kind of fit into that industry because it's, at the time at least, it seemed fairly well saturated. Well, while I was building fishing rods, what I acquired was a small mini lathe. This is really small. This is 7 by 10 inches working space. And I bought this off of Craigslist for a couple $100 because I wanted to build some reel seat hardware that I could use on my bamboo fly rods, or just building hardware that I could use for the rod making. And this was neat. I never worked in metal in my life prior to this. I grew up as a woodworker. That's what my dad taught me to do, or my dad let me use his equipment to learn how to become a woodworker. And I think that primarily involved me breaking my dad's tools. But I learned a lot of just like how to make things growing up. And I had this mini lathe and I was really intrigued because it was a really new media to work with. And so I just started kind of tinkering around with it. And during this time in kind of like 2014, 2015, during my rod making kind of adventures, I stumbled upon a blog. And, this is a time in history, where blogs were kind of still popular. There's not as many blogs nowadays. But Dave Triesenberg, he started in Minnesota and eventually moved to New Mexico. But Dave Triesenberg has a blog called North Branch Reels. And I found this website mainly because I was looking at machining reel seats, and he's got some really good plans and tutorials on reel seats. But I started to just kind of see the other stuff that Dave was doing. And pictured in this screenshot of his website, he also publishes all of his reel plans, which is really awesome. I've always been intrigued by fishing reels, just the mechanics of them, but never really understood how they went together or the dimensions of them. And Dave has this fantastic resource at North Branch Reels where he puts up all the plans of the reels that he makes. And with tutorials on how to make different parts, and it just really opened my eyes as to like, this could be a possibility. You know, I love making things. I really enjoyed working with metal for the first time. It was a really new media to work with. And I had the mini lathe. So, you know, what the heck? And on his website, so he has really nice drawings. So just, you know, big overview drawings of a fishing reel. So you could just see all the different parts that kind of go together to make a fishing reel. But then within this, he also has plans for, you know, the side plates of the fishing reel. It gives you all the dimensions, or how to make an S handle. Like we all see pictures of S handles, but it's really nice to have some numbers and being able to, like, you know, mathematically see what this looks like so that I can make it and cut it and start to kind of put together the pieces of the puzzle. So Dave's website, if folks have never heard of North Branch Reels and you have an interest in reel making, I would highly encourage you to check it out. And really today, I think my goal today is not to sell you guys fishing reels, primarily because I can't make enough. Like, reel making's a hobby for me, and I can't make enough to keep up with all the people that are asking me. But what I hope to do is inspire people to be like, you know what? I have some tools, or maybe I'm looking for a new hobby. And maybe there's people in the room that have access to metalworking tools. It's not uncommon for people to have a metal lathe in their basement. My dad grew up with a metal lathe in his basement, and these are things that are somewhat accessible. And there might even be people in the room that are machinists, and they never even thought about making a fishing reel. So just to give you an idea, so like Dave Triesenberg's website, these 5 reels up here at the top, he's got plans for all of them. On his website, everything you know, all the dimensions you would need to know. He goes through material testing, you know, what are ideal metals or plastics to be using, and just really kind of walks you through the process and demystifies it. Because often that's like a barrier to us trying something new, is we just don't know where to start. And this website is an absolute gold mine for where to start. So using this framework, I went down to the local metal shop where I lived at the time and just bought some bar ends. You know, so at large industrial cities, you can go to metal yards and just buy bar ends or remnants of stock, and you pay a couple dollars and you get, you know, more metal than you can imagine. And I started, you know, I went back. I took my mini lathe and I was just, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. The worst thing that happens is I wasted $5. You know, I took this chunk of aluminum that I got at the yard and just started turning it to see if I could put together something that resembled a fishing reel. And so this is really where it started, back in like 2015 for me. So it's wild to think that it's been 10 years since I started this adventure. And the first reel that I made was a really basic reel. You know, it's 2 7/8 of an inch, so pretty small, fits my 4-weight trout rod, and kind of a basic raised pillar reel. It's got some different, you know, bunch of aluminum with a little bit of brass or bronze in it, click pawl, nothing fancy. But you know what? This thing fishes. It fishes, it balances my rod just how I was hoping it would, and I've been able to land quite a few fish on it. And the surprising thing is, this was made with that little 7 by 10 inch mini lathe that I picked up off of Craigslist for $200. Oh, the other thing is mini lathe and the drill press. So like the whole patterns on the spool, that was all done with a drill press. And I'll have another picture here in a second to kind of show you how some other ones like that. So this was my first. My second reel, I do have a sweet spot for Hardy Perfects. If you've seen the reels that I make, they tend to, most of what you see are going to look like Hardy Perfects. And so the second reel, you know, I basically started making the reel that I really wanted. At the time, I could afford a mini lathe. I couldn't afford a Hardy Perfect. You know, I put my money into that $200 mini lathe, and come hell or high water, I'm going to make myself a Hardy Perfect, or something close to it. And so the second reel was, it's got the standard plate line. It's still the raised pillar, and that's primarily because at the time I still only had a drill press. And for all the hole patterns and the porting on the spool, that was me with a protractor, putting the protractor on there and drawing out my pattern and getting the increments as close as I could, and then punching the hole centers and then drilling them. It doesn't need to be perfect. Doesn't need to be exactly symmetrical, but it just needs to look good and be functional. And at the end of the day, that's really what a fishing reel needs to be, is functional. And we gravitate towards certain designs because we like them, but we also want things that are going to be functional. So the second reel, it looks like a Hardy Perfect. It has a basic click pawl set up inside, and it wasn't until the third reel where I started thinking about how I could actually package what my dream reel is, the 1912 Perfect. So it's got the swing arm and the classic pawl with the spring holder, and there's a tensioner on there. And so in my third reel, I worked really hard to be able to package all the stuff I needed into that reel. Now it looks like there's quite a bit of space, but the challenge is each of those pillars has a screw head that comes through onto the inside of that frame, and really being able to kind of package everything around that was it was a fun, little adventure to do, and it works. And I still fish this 3.5-inch Perfect today. It's landed a bunch of fish, and I don't know, it's been kind of wild. And if you have a Hardy Perfect, what goes along with that is going to be a nice block leather case. Some way, when you see the classic old reels, it's usually the full package deal, or we hope we have the full package deal, where we have the reel and a nice leather case to go along with it. And in this one, the first leather case I made for it is modeled more after Farlow's, another English reel maker back in the early 1900s, a Farlow style block leather case with the flaps, and did a shearling lining for it. Okay, so these are my first, really big adventure into reel making. This is definitely in the realm of hobby. I'm very much tinkering, trying to figure out how these things actually go together, getting out and fishing them, seeing what I like and what I don't like. None of these reels were anodized, and there was no way of anodizing them because certain parts were pressed together, and I couldn't take them apart to mail them to an anodizer. And so I used them and found out that different metals will still corrode, even though brass doesn't really corrode that much on its own, and aluminum doesn't corrode that much on its own. But you put them together, it's not a good situation. And so I started to kind of think about how I could redesign these so that, for one, they would last longer, but also I got some kind of hard advice from a friend who is just, that's a small niche market for someone that wants a raised pillar reel that's going to corrode on them and just take a lot of maintenance. So during this time, I was starting my family. After I made the second reel, my daughter was born. The third reel was made when I had free time, when my daughter was napping. And also during this time, I was starting I was kind of mid-career. I just became a biology professor up here in Bellingham, Washington, and we were moving my whole family north from Central California. And so I was using these, kind of figuring out what I'm going to do with this hobby. And so moving to Bellingham, Washington, it rains a bunch. I needed a shop, partly to store my wooden boat because I didn't want to leave that out in the rain. And during this, I started kind of acquiring the tools necessary because I really liked the reel making. There's a lot of rod makers, bamboo rod makers and graphite rod makers on the West Coast, but there aren't that many reel makers. And if you think about it, there's only a handful of reel makers on the West Coast. There's a handful, there's a few in Oregon. There's maybe 3 or 4 I can think of in Oregon. There's about 3 or 4 in Washington. up here by Bellingham and in the lower mainland of British Columbia, there's a bunch more, but there's not that many. And I really saw this kind of niche where I love the reel making and there aren't that many reel makers. And I'm going to just kind of keep doing my hobby because people like them. So I acquired this property that has a pole barn on it, and I started to kind of build out a small basic machine shop. In Bellingham, Washington is the Grizzly tool distributor. Most people, if you're a woodworker, you've probably heard of Grizzly. They also make metalworking tools. And so it's really dangerous when you can just drive halfway across the town and have someone put thousands of dollars worth of machinery in your car and let you take it home. But I acquired a bigger lathe and a milling machine. And also the third component, which is really, really important for reel making, at least for myself, with the manual machining, is a rotary table. So if people are interested in reel making, if this is a hobby that you're thinking about, or if you have access to tools, these are like the three main things that you need machinery-wise to be able to make a fishing reel. All right, so the metal lathe is going to spin the metal so that we can make circular objects. The mill is going to be used to do hole patterns. Well, the mill in combination with the rotary table is going to be used to make hole patterns and gears and all kinds of other things. And so I find the rotary table really fun. It's something that I used to do very manually with a protractor and a drill press. But the rotary table is a tool that it spins 360 degrees and it's graduated, and you can have an indexing plate on it so that you can spin however many holes you want in a circle. And this is a really helpful tool for making different aspects of a fishing reel. And so I have some little time-lapse videos to just kind of show you what this does. And so, in the click paw reel, there's going to be gears. And when I first started, I bought gears from McMaster Carr, but they weren't the right size. They weren't the right type of metal that I wanted. And so I wanted to be able to make my own gears. And to be able to do that, you need the milling machine and the rotary table. And so I'm able to go through and increment out, how many teeth I want to be able to make and just keep cutting. And in this case, I'm cutting a 30-tooth gear. And this gear is going to go into the heart of my click paw reel. That's hopefully going to take decades of abuse from handling hot fish or just reeling and unspooling line. Can also use the rotary table in the horizontal position to make the port pattern on a spool of a fishing reel. Instead of manually drawing these out with a protractor, I can just count the degrees or the increments and then manually plunge the mill down and do the hole pattern that I want. And this is all very precise as to where I want it to be and the size of the holes that I want it to be. And the last one is thinking about, so I really wanted to move my fishing reels into a full frame, get away from the raised pillars that were causing corrosion issues. And so to do that, I still use the rotary table. And what I'm doing is I just plunge into a spool into that frame and I just cut out the windows. And I step up the end mill size so that I can get to the frame dimensions that I want so that I can have a full frame reel that's not going to corrode and take years of abuse. I can also send this thing off now and get it anodized so that the anodizing is going to resist corrosion and abrasion and just make the reel last longer and work a little bit better. So the rotary table for me was kind of a huge step up in my ability to make fishing reels because I could make more complicated parts and I didn't have to rely on what I could find from different distributors. I could truly make what I wanted in the material that I wanted to make it in. So what I've kind of settled on, the primary reel that I make, I call it the Zincraft Perfect. It's mostly what I make is the 1912 check. I have made some with the 1906 check, that big horseshoe spring. I haven't made too many of them. They're a little finicky. I like them, but they're just not ideal for everybody. But the 1912 check, the one in the upper left, is a real workhorse. I mean, this was developed and made by Hardy between 1910 and 1917. You'll still find these reels in service today. And so to me, this is like the holy grail of reel. This thing, it's stood the test of time. There's still specimens out there landing whatever fish the people are going for. And so I want to make them. And it's just, to me, the dream reel. And I truly enjoy making these for myself or for other people. The design for the Perfect that I have is largely set. I've been making these. I'm getting close to 100 1912 Perfects. They've been used all over, and I've gotten really good feedback from folks. I don't feel like I have to tweak anything really in the design of the reel. But what I do enjoy doing with them still is thinking about the materials that I use in the reel. And so I take people's requests. You know, if I can find materials to make the reel, I try to incorporate it. You know, so people will probably recognize, you know, it's like brass face perfects. That's what a lot of the vintage Hardy Perfects were in the early 1900s. They were brass face perfects. They also made a fair amount of alloy faced perfects. But I still, yeah, I use materials I can find. And one of my favorites right now is bronze. The one here on the left. The bronze is a really nice chocolate brown color. And one of the reasons why I like using the brass and the bronze, it gives a little bit more weight to the reel. It actually takes your casting where you want to be up really high. A heavier reel is going to make you settle down and use your core torso more when you're casting. And the reel might be heavy, but if you do it right, you're using your torso and you can cast this thing all day long. The beauty of these is they also develop a really nice patina. And if we think about the patina, the bronze starts out chocolatey brown. It has a really high copper content. And that chocolate brown patinas into this, the only way I can really describe it is like a galactic patina. I mean, it gets a lot of blues and purples and silvers, and it just, the characteristics of the patina that comes out of the bronze is just truly unique. And the more you use it, the better that patina gets. Because when I send them to folks, they come out nicely polished. You can see yourself in them, but the more you use them, the more character they get. The brass turns into a really nice chocolatey brown, but it doesn't have that kind of characteristic swirls and different colors to it. It's just a nice smooth chocolate brown. So I do still play quite a bit with the metals that go into the reels to just make them fun. The reels that I make vary in size. So the most common ones I make are 3 1/4 to 4 inch. But I've also made, you know, a 3 inch down on the low end for a nice 6-weight trout rod. Or I've made a 4 1/4 for a gentleman who really loves casting a 16-foot Brooks and Walker and just needed a bigger reel to be able to balance it. So these are kind of my workhorses. These are the reels that I would say are my production reels that I'm willing to make for people because I know they're going to work. They're tried and true. Not only mine, but even they're based on a framework that, you know, it's been around for over 100 years. When making a Hardy Perfect for my own, there's 23 parts that I make that go into making a Perfect. And so I make the vast majority of parts that go into this. So the frame and the spool, the gears I make, the bushing, a lot of the screws, I acid etch the nameplate. I don't have someone engrave that for me. I acid etch that in one of my buildings. The couple things I don't make. I don't make the small machine screws, and I don't make the balls that go in the bushing. And this is primarily because there's just some cost effectiveness. it's not worth me spending 2 hours to make screws when I could buy them for, the really small screws. I might pay 50 cents for a small screw, but that's still a far cry from me spending hours to make a batch of screws for a fishing reel. So to give you an idea of some of these parts that I make, so going back to the gears or the click pawl system that goes into this, I make all of these parts. So I have two different size gear and pawls. So the bigger reels are going to have the bigger click and pawl. The smaller reels are going to have the smaller one. The swing arm, I'm cutting out of brass and shaping that myself. The gears, I buy a sheet of metal and I cut that and I bore it and I start to work it down into the shape of a gear. I'll stack them on the mandrel and cut a whole bunch of them at once using that rotary table. So I make 23 parts for the fishing reels. It's not just the click pawl parts that I make. I also make a bunch of screws. So thinking about the spool retaining screw, which is something that I can't find online. And I like my own character of the screw. So I'll make those myself and I'll knurl the ribbing pattern on that. The milling machine comes in really handy if I want to be able to cut the slotted head on a screw. And this just really gives me the flexibility to make things when I need to make them versus buying them. Again, the few things I do buy, I buy the really little screw, the one that's down here on the dime. That's a 0.80 screw. I don't feel like I'm that old, but those are little screws to see. And even tapping that hole for that screw is probably one of the most nerve-wracking things in the whole process, because I might have had 3 months invested in making this part, and then that tap breaks as I'm putting the threads in the hole, which is part of the process, but still very frustrating. So I make I make the vast majority of parts that go into the fishing reels that I'm making. So these are my production reels. But I also really like the history of reel making and fly fishing. But making fishing reels, I'm really intrigued by the history of reel making in the U.S. and in the U.K. And so one of the historical aspects of this is I've gotten to know James Hardman. James Hardman has written several articles for the American Fly Fisher. James Hardman, he's 87 now. He is a reel maker himself. He's been making fishing reels since the 1980s. He was great friends with Stan Bogdan when he was alive. And so I first got introduced to James Hardman by reading about the ebonite side plates that were used in some of the early late 1800s, early 1900s fishing reels on the East Coast. And James Hardman wrote several just fantastic articles on this. He's an active member on the Clark's Forum, but James Hardman is 87 and he's realizing his own mortality, and he longs for the days when he could actually stand at his machine and make reels like he used to. So back in the late 80s and the early 90s, James Hardman made a few fishing reels of a design that I find just absolutely intriguing. And this fishing reel is one that I'm calling it the Hardman Classic. James Hardman made this fishing reel. I don't know if it can get a whole lot more classic than this. It's got the nickel silver rims, nickel silver pillars, nickel silver reel seat, and ebonite side plates. This is like screaming Edward von Hoff, late 1800s fishing reel. Inside the fishing reel, though, it doesn't have the classic von Hoff dual pads. Inside, it has a version of Stan Bogdan's counter-rotating gears. So James Hardman was really good friends with Stan up until he died. And he used those ideas and made these counter-rotating gears inside this reel that just is absolutely exquisite. And I've been able than willing to share resources with me. He sent me his hand-drawn plans. So, in the bottom right corner is a picture of one of them. He didn't have AutoCAD back in the 80s. He hand drew all of his plans, and he sent me scanned copies of all of his hand drawings of the reel that he was making. And I was able to use that and kind of tweak it to get to something that I was able to make, which I'm calling the Hardman Classic, where it has elements of Vom Hoff style reels and elements of Stan Bogdan kind of all thrown together into one just absolutely awesome package. I primarily fish this on my 6-weight trout rod and 7-weight kind of small steelhead rod. This little, the counter rotating gear mechanism in there would be more than enough to handle a small kind of maybe up to 7 or 8 pound steelhead, because it applies a fair amount of tension in it. So this was a really fun project that I was involved in. This is solely just to kind of preserve the history of reel making. Taking the classic home machinist approach to just let's make some fishing reels for fun and go out and use them and keep this alive. Because Mr. Hardman is 87. I cherish all the years he's left alive, but at some point, all the greats are going to be gone, and I don't want to lose the knowledge or the drive and the expertise to kind of keep this hobby passion alive and sharing it with other people. So along with my reels, I do make leather goods. The leather goods that I make are primarily to kind of package my fishing reels. So thinking about Hardy Perfects, they go along with nice block leather cases. And so I hand stitch and I tool different designs on the cases. I try to make these as true to form as possible. So the lining on them, I import English wool baize fabric to line them, which is what they were originally using back in the early 1900s to line the Hardy or the block leather cases. And I'll design tool designs on them based on try to get as close to what I can for what people's visions are. Some of this comes out of like, hey, send me some scratchings on a napkin and I'll see what I can do. I'm somewhat artistic and I try my best to kind of take the designs that people give me and turn them into something that I can actually make on a case, like the belted kingfisher. I bet most people here recognize the sound of a belted kingfisher when you're out. I myself get frustrated because belted kingfishers catch more fish than I do, but you're in a good spot when the belted kingfisher is there catching all the salmon fry. So primarily what I make are cases for the fishing reels, but a couple years ago I started making leather fly wallets as well. These are kind of modeled after the fly wallets that Arnie Mason was making out of Southern Oregon for a long time. And since Arnie has retired, I've been making more because there's not many leather wallets being made out there. And it's something, I have the leather, I have the skills, and it's been really fun. Again, taking the ideas that people come up with and trying to translate that into the case itself, whether it's making leather wallets that are kind of a Western fusion. A lot of leather making leather crafts have their history in Western wear, and using some of that kind of Western history to make different designs or tooling patterns that are a fusion between fly fishing products and Western history. And this is kind of what's up for grabs for the raffle prize tonight. Would be a leather fly wallet. I have a bunch of different colors of leather. I could do different patterns. I can do people's initials on them. The closure, it's actually a magnetic closure, which is really handy because in the winter, when you got maybe gloves on or your hands are cold, you don't have to push that brass snap into place. The snap, it hits it and it's done. It locks right in. And they're a little bit smaller than Arnie's, so they fit right into the chest pocket of your waders, no problem. Okay, the last couple things I have, people often ask me what my reels sound like. Instead of showing you someone fishing, I don't know, I'm of the generation of the Big Lebowski, where the Big Lebowski just lays on the floor and listens to people rolling strike after strike while they're bowling. And so I put together a fun little thing. This is audio from a friend, Eric Jackson. Well, he was trout fishing in Alaska. If you've ever been up there, the rainbow trout in Alaska put a lot of steelhead to shame. And so this is an audio from one of his trips up there fishing the 3 3/4 perfect.
Eat it. Eat it. There it is. There it is. There it is.
We're not hearing the a little bit there, but then it cut off.
I think to myself, I might not take it anymore.
This is insane.
Just to know.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what it sounds like. Hopefully the audio came through. Up to this point, I haven't really showed you pictures of fish, but the reels that I make have been sent all over North America, South America, Japan. These reels are catching all kinds of fish, whether it's 30+ pound Atlantic salmon, 20-pound northern steelhead, brown trout in Chile. It's been really fun to make reels for folks and kind of live vicariously through their adventures and get myself out fishing as well and getting to meet people like Steve up north on the Skeena, and just it's been a heck of a hobby, and who knows where it's going to go in the future. That's all I got for slides and stuff. I'm happy to go back and revisit things or answer questions, or if people just want to, let me know.
Thank you, Matt. We're gonna see if we have some questions. Doesn't seem to be.
Reels approximately a year do you make?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It was kind of cut off.
How many reels per year are you able to make?
So I do somewhere between 15 and 20 reels a year. These are, so I have a day job. I'm a biology professor. I'm a dad. I try to get out and fish. And I make reels in the evening when my daughter goes to bed, and a little bit on the weekends when I have some free time because the river's blown out. So it takes me, I'll do a batch of 6 to 8 reels, and it takes me around 5 months.
I have a question. How far are you out on somebody adding their name to the list?
At this point, I've actually closed the list for the most part because it's gotten a little out of hand.
Yeah.
And I want to maintain this as a a passion and a hobby. Right now, at least with the list I got, the last person on it is maybe 2+ years out.
That's great. Sure. Have you thought of taking on an apprentice?
Do you live in Bellingham?
Yes. I think he's getting ready to move now.
So I think one of the coolest aspects of reel making is that it's been a super fun community. And I chat with reel makers, people that are just wanting to get started and talk about design, talk about learning the process. I've also I talk with people that are machinists, that are like career machinists that, my cousin builds stuff for the government. He can't tell me what he makes. But he makes stuff for the government on 5-axis CNC machines, and he sees what I'm doing, and he's just like, that's crazy. So part of I love doing this, and I'm happy to talk to people about it. So either call me, email me. If you're coming through Bellingham, reach out. I'm happy to show you around. If you move to Bellingham, who knows? Not to say I haven't thought about taking on an apprentice, but I'm happy to kind of get more people into it. And I say this because on the West Coast, there's less than 12 people. When I'm thinking about like people that are home machinists or people that are making Benchmade reels, there's definitely less than 12. There's probably like 7 that I can think of. A couple in Washington, a couple in Oregon, and a couple in California. How many bamboo rod makers are there on the West Coast? A lot more.
Okay, I have a question. So what weight rod and what reel would you choose to fish the Kispioks next year?
Honestly, anything from the 3 1/4 to the 4-inch would work just fine.
Right.
It really depends on the rod that you want to pair it with to be able to balance it. The 3 1/4 might be a little light on the backing. So if you do get into a super hot fish and you got to chase it down a few runs, you might be having a hard time. I fished my 3 1/2 and the 3 3/4, and those are kind of the like a 7 weight and an 8 weight, and they have the 2 different size gear pawl setup that would be in any of my reels.
Got to tell a quick story. First time I talked to Matt, he had just come back from fishing Cottonwood, which is a legendary run that we had spent some time on earlier, and he sits down and we go, how'd you do today? And he goes, oh, it's all right. I caught 3, and all of our jaws dropped, and he caught them on lower Cottonwood. And is that what you're using, the 3 1/2 with what weight rod?
That was a 3 3/4 with a 8 weight. So an 81-34 Berkey.
Did those guys leave the hole or did they stay in it?
I stayed there till all the gear boats that were sitting above me watching until they left.
Wow.
I didn't want them to, I just kept fishing it until all the gawkers left because I knew they would come through. I had a good morning there, but they would come through and have cleaned house.
Yeah. Well, in our camp, the Camp Kispioks, he was top rod that day, no doubt. Anyway, and humble to boot. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for the invite.